Thanks, Terry. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here today at the VCU Autism Center for Excellence. Today we're going to work on and look at a framework and tools for comprehensive program planning. This will be a brief overview of using the CAPS model to help you effectively develop a comprehensive program plan. First, we're going to start out and look at what the purpose of education is. Looking at special education, IDEA, we know that all children with disabilities have available to them a free or appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designated to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. Those last parts, the unique areas, the unique parts of autism that we want to look at today and break down those parts and make sure that we are preparing individuals for further education, employment, and independent living. As we look at that, we need to step back and look at what is happening today. What are the results that we are getting today for the individuals with autism that we are serving? Right now, if we look at adults 22 and older, 73% have lived with their parents in a study out of 2002. 90% could not gain or keep employment, and 95% had difficulty making or keeping friends. Again, when we go back and you think about the first slide, what is the purpose? What are we here to do? This slide does not show that right now or in the past 10 years we've achieved that goal. Further, if we look at the employment of individuals with autism, 6% of individuals with ASD have full-time employment. 12% of individuals with Asperger's syndrome or high-functioning autism have full-time employment as well. So when we're looking at this and again thinking about what the purpose of providing this comprehensive program planning is so needed today in education. Another look at it, and I put a sign of our failure, and I know it sounds difficult, but I think it's something that we need to be challenged to look at differently for the future. A study of 114 adults. When we looked at it for outcome, this is a study from 2005, a measure of good outcome would be that they're employed, engaged in education or vocational training, living independently with 2 or more friends, or in a steady relationship. That would be a good outcome. A fair outcome would be A and B, okay, employed, 2 or more friends. And finally, a poor outcome would be, or very poor outcome, was neither A or B. When we're looking at that, of the study of 114 individuals, 0 said they had a good outcome. At this point in their life, 0 were saying that they had this type of outcome. Again, looking at a fair outcome, not 8% of those individuals said they are employed, education, living independently, or 2 or more friends and a steady relationship. Again, 8%. And finally, a poor outcome. 92% of the individuals in this study, with no difference between the individuals with autism who are considered high functioning and those with more classic presentation. So when I say it's a sign of our failure, I think it's something that we have to look at and step back and look at the program we're providing. Is it unique? Does it prepare people for further education, to live independently, to be able to maintain and keep jobs? So the goals and the challenges I think that we have ahead of us are to learn the social skills and engage in social interactions. We need to really be targeted in how we do that, how we prepare the individuals for the future, to gain those independent living skills, to understand self as it relates to sensory and emotional needs. Are we addressing this in our programs? Some folks would step back and say we don't need to address that in it. We're working on the academics, only on the academic side. We need to learn problem-solving skills, and we need to learn the academic content as well. But again, we look at these, it's all of them. It's not just one, or it's not the final one, okay? And looking at that, the science to service gap, what is known is now what is being adopted to help children, families, and adults. And what is key is the implementation gap. What is adopted is not used with fidelity and good outcome for the consumers. What is used with fidelity is not sustained for a useful period of time, and what is used with fidelity is not being done on a significant scale, according to Fixon and Blase. So what works? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. What works? How could the future look differently? We know that effective intervention practices plus effective implementation practices make for good outcomes. Again, I put this slide back in to emphasize that we must meet the unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So as we go through this process, and we're talking about the comprehensive autism planning system, what we're going to do is try to look at the implementation that we just talked about that is needed, and the ability to transition that. So we look at, we talk about the three-tier models. So we talk about those often today in schools. On the left side, you'll see that it says the academic system, right? So important that we look at that. And we do a lot of baseline, a lot of work on the academic side. If you're doing reading, for example, intervention, you might be looking at the DIBELS, and you get a baseline of where the students are. On the right side, we look at the behavior system. What's in place across the school? When I've often asked, what systems are we using to gather baseline data on behaviors, or how do we know we're targeting and meeting the unique needs of the individuals? And we look at that. Most people do not have any type of baseline data and have not really looked at the interventions needed for meeting the unique needs of individuals. The three-tiered model does not work unless you address both sides. You must address the academic, but you must address the behavior side. Otherwise, it will fall over. It will tilt over. You're only addressing one side of this. So for this program to work, you must address both sides. This is a short video kind of looking at, if you think, the three-tiered model and having both sides addressed, the academic side and the behavior side. Here's a young man who has successfully transitioned and had the right experience. Difficult one, but the right experience, and I'm going to let the video speak for itself. Let's take a moment and look at this.
Finally tonight, there have been a lot of famous graduation speakers this year, but one young man in Smithfield, Rhode Island made us stop and listen to every word. You won't know his name. You will know the name of the challenge that makes him tend to look down. And by the way, he didn't say a word until he was 5 years old. Tonight, you'll also know his American heart. Out of all the students, Eric Duquette may have once been the least likely to speak on graduation day.
It is with great humility and pride that I stand before you as your salutatorian. I started my academic career being diagnosed with a serious learning disability, autism. My parents were told that my prognosis was poor and that I would probably end up in an institution. They thought differently. Today I stand before you accepted into every institution of higher learning that I applied to. So I guess in a way the experts are right about the institution thing.
Eric Douglas Duquette.
Eric is on his way to college, majoring in biology. By the way, he's fluent in Spanish, too. Every day, his parents focused on just 10 words for up to 8 hours a day, even teaching him sign language as a supplement.
I want to thank all of my wonderful classmates who went out of their way to always make me feel wanted. All of my wonderful teachers, you made me want to come to school each day. I hope I've made you all proud. I want to thank my mother and father for teaching me that in life it is all about the choices we all make. Thanks, Mom and Dad, for the choices you made, believing in me and not giving up. I truly love you.
And from the child who learned emotions with the determination that some of us learn calculus.
Never underestimate the power of a smile. Do not allow yourself or others to be defined by your limitations, but rather abilities. Never underestimate yourself. Congratulations, class of 2010. Enjoy tonight, for it will soon just be a memory. Thank you.
And happy graduation, Eric.
And as you can see in the video, one of the things that they talked about was how much energy this individual must put into learning emotions, and how much time was spent specifically on that. But again, for these great outcomes, we must think differently. So as we go on from here, I'm going to talk more about how we develop this comprehensive program and how you can do it yourself. When developing a comprehensive program, one of the ways we do it, at the Ohio Center for Autism Low Incidence is we use the UCC, which is the Underlying Characteristics Checklist, the ISI, the Individual Strengths and Skills Inventory, a global guide from the Ziggurat model, the Ziggurat worksheet, and the CAPS. And we use this as a flat, as we go through, this is kind of the flow of going from understanding the unique characteristics of the individual, to good intervention practices, to the side of implementation. Again, we want a snapshot of the individual. We want identifying the meaningful priorities. So thinking ahead, looking at the future for this individual, ensure that development of strategies matches the unique characteristics and ensuring that they go and are implemented. So one thing we'll find as we talk about the CAPS is cookie cutters are good for making cookies, and that's about it. When we're looking at designing something unique for an individual with autism spectrum disorders, we're not going to be able to take a cookie cutter approach. We're going to have to understand the unique needs that individual presents. So again, as I talk about that, we're only going to talk about number 4 today. In other areas, we'll go back and I'll give you references for the UCC, the ISI, the Ziggurat. But we're going to talk about the CAPS and what this means to implement this program, and going back to what Fixin says as far as implementation being that critical part. Good practices and good outcome are developed by that implementation plan. The UCC, often I've heard people say, this teacher or that paraprofessional, they just understand autism. They understand that student. They're great at that work. I believe what that is they're great at seeing the autism. They know it. For those who don't typically see it, who don't really understand the underlying characteristics, the UCC is great to help all individuals, all folks working with the individual themselves, see what the autism and how it presents in that particular individual. So we're going to look at what's below the surface. No longer can we just address the behaviors we're seeing above the surface. For too long, we tried to do that with ineffective behavior plans. Now we're looking below the surface, looking at the sensory, biological, emotional needs of the individual, communication needs. We address that, but it's often the larger part that needs to be addressed. The ISI is a wonderful tool to be able to show the individual's strengths and skills. Again, the individuals with autism have more strengths and skills, as many as any other student. What we need to do is be able to harness those and make sure we're using them effectively. The Ziggurat will help us design the effective evidence-based intervention strategies that are needed. And again, Grossman and Aspie have done a terrific job of putting together something that allows individuals to walk through and understand individuals and address from a very foundational level all the needs and with evidence-based practices. For a reference, go to the National Professional Development Center on Autism Spectrum Disorders. They have evidence-based practice briefs that you can go and download. You'll see all the effective evidence-based practices there. And also you can go to the autisminternetmodules.org, and there that you'll find modules for free online that go right along with the evidence-based practices from the National Professional Development Center on Autism Spectrum Disorders. And finally, what we're going to talk about today, the CAPS. This will show you how to implement this across the school day. When we're looking at this, here's a quick brief presentation of what we're looking at, that the strategies will jump out at you, that this is what you'll see and this is what you'll receive. As a former teacher, I'd often receive a child's IEP with the goals and the present levels of performance. And that one page in the present levels of performance was supposed to tell me I was effectively supposed to tell me about the student and exactly only the goals I was supposed to work on. And most teachers I've talked with, and in my own experience, it was not effective enough. I did not know how to program for the individual. As soon as they walked through the door, I wasn't able to look at that program and say, I understand this person, this individual, and I can start their programming. What we're going to talk about today is a tool that can help you with that, help you with those transitions of knowing the students that are coming to you, being able to plan and make sure that you transfer your knowledge to others as well. So why was CAPS developed? Teams were changing, and each year, as I was training in the field and working with a multitude of teams, what was happening is we'd get a call the following year, and the team would want additional training. And so we'd go down and provide some additional training for that team. And we'd go into the third year, and the next team would say, this is really nice, but now we need training at this level. What we found is what was the knowledge base that the individuals had about the student was not effectively transitioned from one team to the next, from paraprofessionals who were doing incredible work to the next set of paraprofessionals or teachers as well. Students often move with new teams, and as they're moving, we often are reinventing the wheel. So someone moves, even just across a state. Too often, it takes 2 to 3 months to get to know that student and start to plan effectively for them. Then you have those middle months, and then you start moving towards the end of the school year. And really, in that, we cannot waste the time that we have been in the past. We need to start effective programming as soon as the students walk through the door. So simply what works for individuals with not being shared effectively. What does CAPS do? What it can do for you, it facilitates targeted professional development and awareness activities. Within a school team, each member needs a different skill set, right? Everybody comes in with prior knowledge, not just of it might be of students they're working with, but just the knowledge that they have gained. So someone may have had training in picture communication systems, another person may not. We're going to find that out. So we're going to look at the student's program and find out what professional development each team member needs as well. So instead of just blanket professional development, we need to be much more targeted in that. Facilitating those transitions at the end of the year, making sure it's effective. When that comes across to the next person, we start. They understand the student. If they don't, they ask the right questions to the prior team. And providing structured flexibility across methodologies. It provides a venue for individualized team planning, combining effective and diverse strategies. So often, there's a debate on what strategies we need to use. And sometimes somebody will want to come in and only use one set or methodology. It's another way for us as a team to sit down and say, here are the times we're using these specific strategies. It provides consistency of programming across time and setting, personnel, and environments. Again, we need that within. It bridges the IEP and the core curriculum. And too often, we're not giving the full access needed to the core curriculum to the students that we're working with. So who's involved in working and preparing and completing a CAPS? As you can see, it's the parent, guardian, a general education teacher, special education teacher, most people that are going to be on your team. If they all can't be in one place at one time, again, it's something that will effectively communicate to all these team members. So we are talking about framework, not paperwork. As a former teacher, I understand the last thing you need is more paperwork. But I can tell you that there's never a team I've worked with or my colleagues have worked with that have ever complained when they've completed this process. And they would like the folks that have students they're receiving to have also have gone through this process and you're giving them the same type of information. So now we're going to talk about a brief case study of a student who we use the CAPS as the planning process with the team, and what kind of happened from baseline to the interventions that were put in place. And then we'll get into effectively talking about how you could do this as well. So when we look at this, we look at the CAPS. We have time and activity at the top, skills to teach, structure, reinforcement, sensory strategies, social communication, data, and generalization. Obviously, you can read those across the top. I want to show you how we're going to effectively do this and how we're going to broaden the program, a student's program. We're going to develop the skills to teach based on state standards, IEP goals, and if you're using the ziggurat interventions you've developed. So here's Ginny. Ginny was a student that we worked with in the past that had a wonderful team around her, had were working diligently, couldn't have been working any more harder than they were. However, they felt like they weren't on point with exactly helping Jenny progress like they wanted to. So the first thing we did is we walked into the school, and we sat down with the team. We did a baseline with Jenny's team. To do a baseline, we're going to look at the current program. So the UCC would have looked at the skills and the underlying characteristics of Jenny. What we need to look at with the baseline CAPS is, what does your present program look like? Okay, you need to get a good picture of what you have in place so that you can effectively create a different future and a different program. So we walked in and we saw that Jenny, her first activity was a group activity in art. They're working on independence, fine motor skills, and some reciprocal interaction with peers. However, what they did realize is that the structure modifications they had in place were one-on-one assistant with the paraprofessional, hand-over-hand assistance, a modified project for her, and she would sit at the end of the table. So these are some of the things that they were doing with Jenny in her baseline. Her reinforcement was just verbal praise. They were only giving her praise, kind of verbally, and that was it. And we were kind of looking at that and taking some data and seeing that was not effectively modifying her behavior. They weren't using any sensory strategies at the time. Communication and social skills, she was following the general education classroom rules at that time. So again, nothing was modified, and they were only placed in the classroom just like for all the other students. Her data collection was just completed project, and her plan for general education was to take that and go into art class. From 9:30 to 9:35 to 10 o'clock a.m., she was in small group reading, again, active listening, identifying letters and words, answering questions. She had a one-on-one assistant, but again, they were using physical prompts, some letter cards, and then sometimes pointing to the prompts that she needed. Again, this was Jenny's baseline. One of the more difficult things that you have to address in the program is really looking at it. So as you go to develop a program in the future, be sure that you sit down with the team and do a walkthrough. And we're going to talk more about how do you do a baseline walkthrough as well. So in looking at Ginny's day and changing her program, I'm going to move through exactly what happened after the process was complete. Excuse me. Ginny would start her day at 7:30. This is when she would actually arrive at school. And so taking advantage of the time that she got out of the car, instead of waiting until she was actually in the classroom, we recognized that she would transition from the car to breakfast. So the targeted skills we wanted for her to teach were choose breakfast using a breakfast board, using an interactive language board, and independent use of her schedule. And again, Ginny was not being given her schedule until she actually entered the classroom. We're making sure that she had that right away and was using it independently. Again, go back, look at your program and say, if you're using any kind of schedule with a student, doesn't matter if it's picture-based, if it's a trapper planner with the other students, is it used independently by the student? So we're starting again at 7:30. She walks in. She then goes into breakfast. We're looking at structure modifications. We had a choice board of the breakfast items. We had an interactive language board that Ginny could use. And we had a visual schedule there. Her reinforcement was a choice of food. Sensory strategy, she didn't need any in the cafeteria. We didn't see any at the time that really, food smells didn't bother her. The noise wasn't bothering her at the time. Not that we could see. Communication strategies and social skills. We wanted to have additional social language on the board for greetings and questions by other peers and for her to ask for things. And we worked on table manners. Again, was it on the IEP? No, but it didn't have to be on the IEP. But we did want to note that we could work on that. Again, think about the purpose of education and the purpose of the long view of living independently and having those daily living skills as well. So again, we put that as part of it. The data collection was her choice. So we would use a sheet for that, and for the natural aiding language board, we would take down what pictures she was using across that. The plan for generalization was to use the language board during lunch or dinner or at home. And again, we were going to teach and transition that to home and help the family. So as she moved into the general education classroom, Ginny was only included in the classroom day when we walked in before we had worked on the CAPS with her for about 2 hours. This was during breakfast, lunch, and during specials. Okay. During those times, Ginny was doing fine at breakfast and lunch, but she had no interaction with peers, and basically was just eating alone and with her paraprofessional. In the future, and in special, she was having a very difficult time with the noise as well, the noise level and the pace of the activity. So we need to look at those, but that was the only time she was included. She was actually in the resource room about 4 hours a day. Through this process, we were able to transition that she was included 4 hours a day and outside the classroom 2 hours a day, effectively working on academics. So at 8:05, Ginny would walk into her classroom and she'd work on independent work. So things that she'd worked on in the resource room. She brought in her mastered math problems and she'd self-monitor herself with those. I'll show you those in just a moment. She had visuals to help break the task down for her. She had a visual focusing aid that was used. She would complete 5 problems and get a break and have a choice. There was black instruction paper used to kind of narrow down for the sensory area that she didn't have to see all the problems at once. She would follow general education classroom rules. However, they broke those down and made sure that they had those around her desk. And she would also, another part of the independent work was she would work on reviewing lunch choices for others, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. The use of self-monitoring sheets and the percent of independent use. We were really wanting Ginny to help us with the data collection, if you will, and she was doing that by self-monitoring and a data sheet for the transition she was making. Ginny also started to do lunch count. And often at the beginning, the team was not sure that Ginny could do this. What they were going to do is have Ginny work on that, and I'll show you that here in just a moment. But she would chart the lunch count. And when she did that, she would collect and analyze and organize the data. And I have SS there. And that's how we noted that that was a state standard. So we wanted to start look at how we're going to monitor and know that she's working on some of the core content. Following 2- and 3-step directions was also another standard, oral directions, and she could do that. So she had primed for that, and she would have a trained peer buddy. We had social reinforcement from peers as the reinforcement strategy, sticky string for graphing on her sheet, and I'll show you pictures of all these. So there is Ginny's desk when she would arrive in the morning. She would have 5 problems to work on. You can see that, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Raise your hand, and then you receive the choice off of your choice board. She would use the blue pin in the right-hand corner to mark off each of the finished math problems, and then you can see the finished box at the end was for putting in the pencil for that was her work for the morning. Ginny would complete these math problems. These were mastered problems we brought from the resource room that they had worked on. She was using touch math or dot math. And you could see that she was using a visual focusing aid, so she didn't have to see all the problems at once, because sometimes she would jump around the page. So we use this to keep her from going too far, and then also not skipping problems. So prior to this, Ginny was going directly to the resource room, and actually just doing some kind of boxed activities just with a paraprofessional. Now she's engaged and included in her classroom, working on skills that were similar to her classmates. Here's the choice board that Ginny had to pull from. She'd pull these, and she could choose any of these to use after she had just completed her morning work independently. What was critical there is, as you saw in Ginny's baseline data and baseline program, she had a one-on-one assistant who was, if you will, some people use the term kind of helicopter, right, around her, using a lot of hand over hand. She was extremely prompt dependent. So one of the first things we want to do is make sure that we worked on that prompt dependency and kind of remove that from her and having her do independent work in the classroom with her peers. These were other strategies we would use if needed for kind of looking at the sensory side of things. Ginny would use a slant board for writing and wrist extension. She would just clip that on the top, complete her work, and then sometimes use the lifting up the notebook and putting the worksheet underneath it as the finished box. You can kind of see the wedge there as well. We taught her to use that independently. Again, when she needed or felt that she needed it, kind of to move around in her seat, kind of tilt her forward, the occupational therapist put that in place. Here is Ginny's daily schedule. To me, it was one that I thought was somewhat confusing. However, we were really moving her towards using it independently. She would pull off the picture, put it in the now area. After she was completed with the activity, she would then put it in her finished box. But again, what we were taking data on was she independent? What was the prompting level needed by Ginny at the time to use, and how we could make sure that we were ensuring that she was using it. So we wrote down each step, 7 steps it took for Ginny to complete this, and knew at each level what her level of prompt dependency was. So as you go through this and you see, here's the lunch count and lunch prep, organizing that data that I mentioned earlier. Ginny will ask her peers if they have a lunch by holding up the lunch choice. When we started this program with Ginny, Ginny was using the picture exchange communication system. However, in the grade, they had started it in first grade, but they had not transitioned it much into second grade. And she was only using it for about 3 items that she was asking for. One was bathroom, another was just some lotion that she could have for her hands that she liked to put on her hands. And those were really the major 2 activities that she would ask for. So Ginny's mean length of utterance at the moment was about 1 in her baseline. What she would do is she would get up in front of class and hold up a picture. Might be a picture of a hamburger or fries, different school lunches, or a lunchbox for home and school lunch. She'd hold those up, and when we initially started, Ginny would be there, and she'd hold those up for her peers. And if she didn't know what it was, her peer would help her. They would practice before, so she might hold up and say, hamburger. And the students with it would raise a picture of themselves up. And so Ginny would walk around. When Ginny completed that activity, you can see, for example, this particular day, 4 individuals brought their lunch to school. Ginny would walk around and pick up each of those from the students. When Ginny did that, we had worked with the peers for them to say, good morning, Ginny, hi, Ginny, and different things for them to compliment Ginny on. And then we started to work on interactions between her peers. One of the things we often take for granted is that a student walks in, they even know the other students' names. Often they don't. And again, how comfortable are we going to be having those interactions with peers if we don't do that? There are about 25 students in Ginny's class. So if you think 25 times 5 is 125, Ginny had the opportunity for 125 additional interactions with peers within her day in the first 15 minutes of school, right? So for 1 school week, again, think of the numbers, 125 additional. You can call those trials, opportunities. But now Ginny is working on those. And when you think about the purpose of IDEA and what we need to do, and looking in the long view and making sure that we have the right planning in place, this was just a small activity that the general education teacher was more than willing to modify. Now other students started to do it, and Ginny could then be on the receiving end of that. Okay, but we did this for multiple activities, and again we saw the interaction. We saw Ginny's affect have a great change over time. Excuse me. These were the pictures on the students' desks. You can see the one with the hole in it would be the one that would go up. And Ginny would even look at these at times to just look at the names to get to know her fellow students. You can see Ginny is working with her paraprofessional on graphing the data that she just presented, that you just saw on the board. At the top of that, there's a small blue line. That is the kind of the wiki stick area that she would draw, and you can kind of see her crayon marking hitting that. That would allow her to stop, but she would count up, organize the data, and that was the way she took and graphed that data each day. We then could extend this to other academic areas in the future. So here's a short video, just about 3 minutes, of how we changed Ginny's specials. As I mentioned, Ginny was going to specials and they were very difficult for her. Here are 2 peers that are trained. They're using a natural aided language board with Ginny. And this is what they used in the future. Instead of Ginny going to the gym sometimes or other specials that they selected, we also worked with a family and trained them in using this similar. So you'll see in this short video the way that the peers were interacting with her, a very natural setting for Ginny, and her opportunity to be much more engaged with her peers. here's some initial impact data that was taken from Ginny and looking at the way we change specials. Here is before. As I mentioned, Ginny's mean length of utterance per the team was about 1, and this is from the special education, the speech language pathologist. On April 30th, when, again, she'd been using the interactive language boards now for a while at breakfast and other areas. It was up to about 2.5. And then as they started to play the games, that was a modified ants in your pants game that they were having a lot of fun with. She was at, per the sessions that she was using it, 3.5 was her mean length of utterance. But again, direct impact. You can see the social impact. You can see Ginny engagement is extremely high with her peers. And now we're kind of seeing that the type of interaction and programming we want to see. This was only in the first 2 hours of the day. What we saw when the activities were extended in the future, Ginny then built the paper mache volcano that we've all probably done in our classrooms with our students, and then was using an interactive language board right directly within the academic setting as well. So again, the trajectory and the change we had by just kind of looking at the program differently and then how we were going to effectively implement those strategies was something that took a whole team approach. So when we step back, this is the information we want to make sure that is shared from one team to the next. Okay? We can't lose this, and I think one of the greatest threats that we have in education today is that when a child is identified or diagnosed, that when we start and have effective strategies that are in place, that we're not moving those on and we don't have a form and a way of effectively moving those on. It's kind of like looking at medical records. If you move from Ohio to Virginia, those will follow you, right? And hopefully the physicians treating would then pick up right where they belong, kind of look at that and effectively see that. We need to have the same type of effective programming and then effective transition of that to someone else. So this is one way. Even just simply receiving, take a photograph and a 2-sentence description of the method that you used, the strategy that you came up with, and make sure that makes it into your CAPS. So now I'm going to go through the CAPS team process. Again, just wanting you to get a general sense of how you could start this and this might become effective for you is you need to have a facilitator, usually a current team member, who could take the team through and has a general understanding of the student. We want them. It could be a school psychologist, a general education teacher, the SLP, the OT. I often want to stay away from the special education teacher because it typically is who it falls on. We want to make sure that this is a full team approach and it's not, and this is about the whole child and the whole team. The role of the facilitator is they explain the process. And I have references later that give you much more detail on how to do this. But they explain and they enlist all the team members and then ensure that the team members take ownership of the commitments they've made in this process. We need a recorder, right? So effective classroom teaching. We have somebody recording if we're working in cooperative groups. Someone with those really strong clerical skills that can kind of take down the information that we've been talking about. And the role of the recorder is just to kind of facilitate and assist the facilitator in gathering the team information. And the team members, of course, who are going to provide that information. However, often could be the case that the occupational therapist or a speech language pathologist, a school psychologist may not be there for the team meeting. Again, the record keeper can then go to them or the facilitator as well to gain the information. Often what we've found is that for an OT and SLP to be most effective in providing intervention and assistance to the whole team is they need to see what the program looks like. This allows for them to see the whole program, and all of a sudden they have a multitude of ideas for folks to implement. So as I mentioned earlier, the most difficult part of this process is the baseline CAPS. Sitting down and looking at the full program and where it is in its state. We typically want to jump in and talk about all the activities and things we could do differently, but we need to kind of look at that and get a really sharp baseline because it shows us where we are, and it also is going to show us the program growth over time. The daily CAPS when I say daily CAPS, what we want to do is I would recommend completing a CAPS within the first month of school. So not when the IEP is developed, which is typically in April, May, and June, but once you've started school and you have a steady schedule, and it usually takes 3 to 4 weeks before we're there, and then I would sit down with the team members and then effectively take the IEP and start looking at that across time, and we'll go into that. So the facilitator, within those first weeks, will then sit down with the team members, and they're gathered, and they'll do a virtual walkthrough of the day. Sometimes some teams have actually got up and they go to the front door, and they walk in just like the student, and they start taking down the information right from that activity. We had one student, they said, well, he'd get out of the car and pick up a leaf every day. And so they saw that as an opportunity for him to, and then sometimes he would go by and he would get a drink of water each day. Again, looking at those different opportunities. That virtual or actual walkthrough. So the facilitator, that's the first thing they want to get down, is the time and activity for those 2 columns for the entire day. The recorder will just clock those times for each activity, and the team members just consider the activities and the expectations during that time. So seems like probably an easy thing to do, but when we really break it down and we understand that student, we're going to have to go through their day. It takes a little more time than we may think. Then when we get into kind of looking at the skills, the process really speeds up, and we look at going across and including all tasks and activities that happen throughout the day, which the student requires support for. We have reading and math, but we also need to make sure we are capturing the non-academic times, like recess and lunch. And again, we're just taking those down and going across with those, and we're just filling out the skills to teach. Some people like to fill out the CAPS form by doing each time going across. Some like to kind of consider it going down on each of the activities. It's really a preference of the team on which way they want to handle it. The recorder wants to make sure they get all the objectives, standards, and goals. And so one thing that we want to have there beside you is what is the grade level curriculum? What are the state standards that you have as well? So make sure that you've gathered those materials as we're sitting down, and you have the IEP, you have all that together, and you're working through, and you're making sure that you're taking down in the skills to teach what those objectives are in each of those areas. For structure and modifications, again, we want to take into account all the visual, auditory, physical adaptations that may be needed. I've a hint in here that says, look at the teach questions. What activity am I doing? How much of that activity do I need to do? When am I finished? And what's next? For this block of time in structure and modifications, those 4 questions should be completed and answered for that student. How do they know when they're finished? How do they know what's next? How do we know that independently? So we want to break that down. The recorder will bullet all the modifications and structures that are in place and ideas that for change. And again, consider additional strategies and methodologies that would provide greater access to the core curriculum. For communication and social, as you move along these columns and you're looking at this and thinking, what can I do? We need to, again, rely on the speech-language pathologist and other team members who understand the student, but making sure that that individual has the opportunity for receiving the information in the mode they need and for expressing during each time period. So we need to, does the student express information or needs? Is an augmentative communication device needed for the student? So how does that student receive the information? Again, when we start to figure this out and we share it across all team members, we really see that students' programs begin to change by great factors that other special teachers, resource teachers understand how the student effectively communicates and how to also effectively communicate information to that student. Does the student have opportunities to engage in social interactions with peers in class? We just talked about Ginny and her engagement with other peers. The opportunities that in 10 minutes during a week you can have 125 additional interactions. And then you multiply that by the 180 school days we typically have. And there's probably 3 or 4 different opportunities in a day to actually to do that. So Again, the recorder is going to take down all the activities that are included in communication and social skills. And again, think about the future. What are those daily living skills? What are those social skills that the individual needs? We often find that by having the student engage that often, that new things arise, that we start to understand the student better, but we also understand the things that are missing. We often have kind of created programs where we don't allow the students to make a mistake, and we need the students to learn how to kind of recover from that, and also how to help implement, again, a better program for the student. In the data collection, we want to embed the data collection. I understand we don't want the data collection that you're taking. You kind of see a form like the CAPS, and you think, oh, just another piece, more paper and more data. What we don't want to do is embed that, like we said, Ginny. Her data was the interactions that she had. She had that many interactions with peers. We saw that go through. We were taking the independence that she was using as well. Does the data collection match the method and the resources available in the classroom? So again, we need to kind of consider how we put in place easy and effective methods for data collection. And again, as team members come together, typically ideas start to come out from other team members about how easy we can make this. The recorder will note all of that, and again, just keeping that data, obviously, with all the other sources of information you keep in your classroom. And so as we move forward to generalization, again, not enough programming of generalization. So as many of you know, we may learn one skill in a classroom and not be able to take it right outside the school door. We may learn something at home and not have generalized that into school. So what we want to do is, how can we apply these skills and supports in a different way throughout the day? Again, those may be at home. How can the student be empowered to initiate the skill and without the prompts that the student has in place at that time? So again, as we are generating those, it's a very dynamic process, back and forth with the team, in putting that down as we generalize. So again, we're looking at this and seeing that as this comes together, the program begins to fundamentally change. And really what you're doing is you're changing the trajectory of the possibilities and success for the student. We're going to do things a little differently, but we're going to make sure that as we think about the purpose of why we're doing this for the individuals, that we're going to meet their unique characteristics. We're going to make sure that we have placed them with the opportunities for employment for the future, place them with the opportunities for further education, to live independently. So again, as we go through this process, I want you to kind of go through this general CAPS form with you. We'll have this online and available that you can download it and use it, print it at your leisure. Let me know if you modify it and find a better way of doing it. We have made some modifications to CAPS in different ways. Here's a modified comprehensive autism planning system. We call it the MCAPS. We use this usually in middle and high school for students who are in the general education classrooms most often, and they're using block scheduling. So we have independent work on the left, group work, tests, lectures, and homework. We kind of broke those down and said those are the areas, and we broke it across skills, structure, reinforcement, and basically, so it's independent work in geography, independent work in math, independent work in algebra, whatever it may be. And that was able to really help other teams kind of looking at this differently, say, for example, with block scheduling. We also made a transition CAPS, looking at modifying this in employment and what this would look like on the job. So we have time, activity, required task of a job, the needed employee training, okay, only if, so reinforcement, social skills, environmental supports, natural supports that are in place already in the workplace. So again, we've modified in some ways. Let us know if you've changed it. This form is really, it's there for you. These resources are there for you. I know we've kind of sped through a lot of looking at the CAPS and how it may effectively help you, but I can tell you with all the teams we worked with, when they've completed this and they've been able to transition this on, they really feel that over time it has fundamentally kind of changed the way that the team who is receiving the student, also the team who is working with it, coming together and being much more cohesive. I've left some resources for you. Here's the CAPS book actually breaks down all the areas that we've talked about in social, sensory, data collection, ideas for all of that if you want to go to use that. The Ziggurat model book, which is, again, a great way of designing a comprehensive interventions and looking at that. A couple of the articles that are out there that, again, if you need a refresher for how this works, and some online resources at ocali.org. We have these archived, the Autism Internet modules I talked about earlier, and the AT Internet modules, Assistive Technology Internet modules. We talked about possible assistive technology in the communication and social area, and so I wanted to leave you with that as well. It has been my pleasure to be here today and have the opportunity to be at the VCU Autism Center for Excellence. Please let me know if you have any further questions in the future, and I look forward to chatting with you in the near future.